Hi everyone, this is Melody Taylor. In this presentation, I will be discussing conformity and group processes. Whether we realize it or not, our exposure to the world outside has both direct and indirect effects on our behavior, way of thinking, and even in decision making. Vice versa, our interactions with other individuals may also bring an impact on how they behave, think, and decide. In this presentation, we are going to dig deeper into how we affect each other's behavior. We will furtherly discuss about the three forms of influence that differ in the level of pressure applied on an individual. From an individual, we will then move to investigating social influence in a group setting. We will explore the reasons why individuals get involved in a group and how groups are formed. We will then shift our focus to examine how groups perform. When conflict arises, we will evaluate how groups augment or synchronize their differences. The ways that people are affected by the real and imagined pressure of others is called social influence. Social influence pervades our daily lives. Intentionally or unintentionally, we tend to imitate the person that we interact with. It appears that we similarly imitate one another automatically, without thought, effort, or conflict, and unwittingly imitate or mimic each other all the time. Mimicry is powerful and is a dynamic process that as we continue doing it, we become more synchronized with the people around us. Social influences vary in the degree of pressure they bring to bear on an individual. People may either conform to group norms or maintain their independence, comply with requests or be assertive, or obey or defy the commands of the authority. The first of the three forms of influence is called conformity. It is defined as the inclination of people to change their perceptions, opinions, and behaviors according to the socially accepted standards. People often experience a cognitive dissonance when weighing conformity. Part of the person sees it is essential if individuals are to maintain good relationship and peaceful way of living, but in other cases, conformity can bring damaging outcomes, like when people drink too much, or take part in drugs, cheat on their taxes, or tell offensive jokes because evidently others are doing the same things. The Sheriff and Ash studies demonstrate that people conform for two very different reasons. One is informational and the other is normative. People conform through informational because of the desire to make precise judgments and assume that they are right when others agree on them. On the opposite of informational influence is normative influence, where people are led to conform due to the fear of being rejected by being deviant. Research has shown that individuals who move away from a group's norm tend to be misunderstood, rejected, and disapproved by people. The difference between the two types of social influence is significant to understand not only the reasons behind why people conform, but also to identify the different types of conformity. Private conformity is also called the true acceptance of conversion or conversion. It occurs when individuals believe that the members of the group are right. That causes people to not only change the behavior, but the mindset as well. On the other hand, public conformity is sometimes called compliance. This refers to a change in the behavior due to the pressure from the people surrounding the individual. People also tend to conform when majority of the members of the group are in favor of an opinion, even if it was not the first choice of the person. However, resisting the pressure to conform and maintaining one's independence may be socially difficult, but it is not impossible. When there is extreme social pressure, people tend to conform because there is intense pressure on them and they start to feel uncertain about their behavior. To fully understand the process of social influence, there are four factors that lead people to create these feelings. Number one, size of the group, a focus on norms, the presence of an ally, and gender. The first factor is group size. Common sense would suggest that as the number of other people in a majority increases, so should their impact. However, according to David Wilder, what matters is not the actual number of others in a group, but one's perception of how many distinct others are thinking independently the group includes. The second factor is the focus on norms. The size of majority may influence the amount of pressure that is felt, but social norms give rise to conformity only when we know the norms and focus on them. We often misperceive what is normative, particularly when others are too afraid or too embarrassed to publicly present their true thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. However, interventions that change perceptions of norms can change people's behavior. But these norms will influence us only when they are brought to our attention. The presence of an ally is the number three factor. Allen and Levine concluded in their experiments that first, it is harder for people to stand alone for their convictions than to be a part of a minority group. Second is any dissent can reduce the normative pressures to conform. Lastly is the gender. Social psychologists used to think that woman is a weaker sex and therefore conform to the norms more than the men do. However, the findings in the study of Igley and Carlisle suggest that familiarity with the issue affects conformity more than the gender. The second form of influence we're going to discuss is called compliance. It is defined as the change in behavior that are elicited by direct requests. Social influence coming from an explicit is often hoped to be responded with compliance. Unlike conformity, we comply to direct requests when we perceive that we are needed or it is something that is required from us. We find ourselves complying to requests mindlessly, especially when a request is being justified with a reason. Research shows that we process oral requests without critically thinking about what we just heard. And in this alone, words that are delivered eloquently can be used to obtain compliance. A simple, unstated, but powerful rule of social behavior is known as the norm of reciprocity. This is defined as the powerful rule of social behavior which dictates that we treat others as they have treated us. The norm of reciprocity has both the negative and the positive sides. It can manifest as a retaliation against those who harmed us, but it can also motivate us to return the favor to those who have shown kindness to us. In this slide, we will learn about the different techniques that are effective in obtaining compliance. A two-step compliance technique in which an influencer sets the stage for the real request by first getting a person to comply with a much smaller request is called the foot in the door technique. It is proven to be a very effective technique that is executed by initially starting with a small request and can be both exciting and troubling. Another interesting two-step trap, arguably the most unscrupulous of all compliance techniques, is also based on the start small idea, and it is called the lowballing. People trapped by lowballing justify their decisions by thinking about the positive things and the great outcome, and as they get more committed, the more they resist to change their minds. An opposite technique that is just as effective as the previous techniques is called the door in the face technique. Instead of starting small, an individual presents a huge request and provides an option to comply with a smaller request when rejected. This is such an effective technique due to the possibility that it involves the principle of perceptual contrast, where the person is first exposed to a huge request that the second request seems smaller. Another effective technique is the "that's not all" technique, where a product is offered at a certain price, but the seller will make it more enticing by giving a discount or adding a bonus item before the buyer could even respond. Berger predicted that people are more likely to buy when a deal is added than when there's no deal or discount offered. The impact of social influence on the behavior spans from implicit pressure of group norms to the traps set by direct requests to the powerful commands of authority. In every case, people have options whether to react with conformity or independence, with compliance or assertiveness, and with obedience or defiance. It can be concluded from all the studies conducted that the greater the pressure, the bigger the influence. Another great social influence form is called obedience. This is a change in behavior produced by the commands of people in authority. We were taught since we were kids how important it is to respect people in leadership, in authority. And when people respond in obedience to orders they knew nothing about, it becomes destructive. Milgram's experiment on obedience revealed a shocking result. 65% of the total participants administered the ultimate punishment of up to 400 volts. Both groups of men and women continued giving the shock every time the experimenter firmly orders it. An individual's character makes a difference, and some people, depending on the situation, are far more obedient than others. However, although personality characteristics may make someone vulnerable or resistant to destructive obedience, it is clear that the situation in which people find themselves has a profound effect. In 1981, Bibb Latané proposed that a common bond among the different processes involved in social influence leads people toward or away from such influence. Specifically, Latané proposed social impact theory. This theory states that social influence of any kind is a function of other strength, immediacy, and number. According to Latané, social forces act on individuals in the same way that physical forces act upon objects. The strength of a source is determined by his or her status, ability, or relationship to a target. Immediacy refers to a source's proximity in time and space to the target. And finally, the theory predicts that as the number of sources increases, so does their influence. As a conclusion, as we have seen, social influence on behavior ranges from the implicit pressure of group norms to the traps set by direct requests to the powerful commands of authority. In each case, people choose whether to react with conformity or independence, with compliance or assertiveness, and with obedience or defiance. From all the research, it is tempting to conclude that the more pressure brought to bear on people, the greater the influence. It is important that we understand how groups work and how individuals influence and are influenced by groups. In this slide, we are going to further investigate how groups are formed, how they perform, and how they resolve conflicts. At the individual level, we explore how individuals are influenced by groups. And at the group level, we explore how groups perform. And at the intergroup level, we explore how groups interact with each other in cooperation and competition. We will also explore the three important aspects of groups, which are the roles, norms, and cohesiveness. To define group, it is may be characterized as a set of individuals who have direct interactions with each other over a period of time and share a common fate, identity, or set of goals. A group can also consist of people who have joint membership in a social category based on sex, race, or other attributes. People engaging in a common activity but having little direct interaction is not considered a group, but a collective. People tend to identify more strongly with the more integrated, coherent groups and to get more satisfaction from them because these groups accomplish certain goals, perform purposeful activities, and have clear boundaries of who does and does not belong to the group. According to social identity theory, an important part of people's feelings of self-worth comes from their identification with particular groups. And so, people care a great deal about being part of groups and about how their groups are valued. We are now going to discuss the key features of groups, which are the roles, norms, and cohesiveness. Number one is roles, where people's role in a group or their set of expected behaviors can be formal or informal. Formal roles are designated by titles like teacher or student in a class, vice president or account executive in a corporation. Informal roles are less obvious but still powerful. Group members sometimes are uncertain about exactly what their group roles are supposed to be and often find themselves in a role that is in conflict with their skills and abilities. Role uncertainty may lead to a poor job performance at work and other varieties of conflicts. In addition to roles for its members, groups also establish norms, which is rules for conducts for members, and just like roles, norms can also be formal or informal. The norms provide individuals with a sense of what it means to be a good group member. Members who are deviating from the norms often receive stronger conformity pressures and are treated very harshly because any form of deviation is a threat to the group's unity and uniformity. And lastly is the cohesiveness. Group cohesiveness can be affected in different ways as a function of cultural differences. Cultural differences exist also in norms about how leaders are expected to behave in groups, and this has consequences for group cohesiveness. Respect and obedience to leaders are more important to people from collectivist cultures than those in individualist cultures. When we engage in activities in groups, we are in the presence of others. We will discuss three important effects that the presence of others can have on individuals. Number one is social facilitation, social loafing, and the individuation. To define social facilitation, it is a process whereby the presence of others enhances performance on easy tasks, but impairs performance on difficult tasks. Social facilitation or social psychologists have long been fascinated by how the presence of others affects behavior. Zanjuk proposed that the mere presence of others is sufficient to produce social facilitation. Some have argued, however, that a better explanation is the evaluation apprehension theory, which proposes that performance will be enhanced or impaired only in the presence of others who are in a position to evaluate the performance. Another account of social facilitation is the distraction conflict theory. It points out that being distracted while we're working on a task creates attentional conflict. Second is the social loafing. Pivotane and his colleagues found that when performing collectively, members of the group tend to loaf or exert less effort. Individuals' performance declines when lesser effort is exerted when acting collectively. Another reason is an individual simply demonstrated poor coordination when working with other group members. And lastly, the individuation. It is the loss of a person's sense of individuality and the reduction of normal constraints against deviant behavior. This phenomenon occurs when the presence of others lead people to perform extreme actions. The social identity model of the individuation effects proposes that whether the individuation affects people for better or for worse reflects the characteristics and norms of the group immediately surrounding the individual as well as the group's power to act according to these norms. In this slide, we are going to discuss the group performance, the problems, and the solutions. Social facilitation, social loafing, and the individuation can all affect individuals whether they are working in real groups or are merely part of a collective or crowd. When a group performs worse than its potential, it experiences what Ivan Steiner called process loss. Process loss refers to the reduction of group productivity due to the problems in the dynamics of a group. According to Steiner, some types of group tasks are more vulnerable to process loss than others. During the 1950s, advertising executive Alex Osborne developed a technique called brainstorming, and this is designed to enhance the creativity and productivity of problem-solving groups. The ground rules for brainstorming call for a freewheeling creative approach are the following. 1. Express all ideas that come to mind, even if they sound crazy. Next, the more ideas, the better. Next, don't worry whether the ideas are good or bad, and don't criticize anyone's ideas. They can be evaluated later. And the last is all ideas belong to the group, so members should feel free to build on each other's work. Alex Osborne claimed that by using these procedures, groups could generate more and better ideas than could individuals working alone. However, one meta-analysis concluded that brainstorming groups are only about half as productive as an equal number of individuals working alone. And rather than being inspired by each other and building on each other's ideas, people brainstorming in a group underperform. Group polarization is defined as the exaggeration through group discussion of initial tendencies in the thinking of group members. It happens when group members initially lean toward a risky position on a particular issue, then the group members on average will move toward an even riskier position after the discussion. But if group members in general initially lean toward a cautious position, the group discussion leads to greater caution. Last is the groupthink. This is defined as the excessive tendency to seek concurrence among group members. This is a particular kind of flawed group dynamic because, again, of an excessive tendency to seek concurrence among group members. Groupthink emerges when the need for agreement takes priority over the motivation to obtain accurate information and make appropriate decisions. Many of the most crucial issues confronting our world today involve conflicts between groups or between individuals and their groups. The desire of some individuals to consume valuable resources conflicts with the need to protect the environment for the greater good. In this section, we will elaborate some of the dilemmas groups often must confront and what factors influence whether individuals and groups act cooperatively or competitively in dealing with them. The notion that the pursuit of self-interest can sometimes be self-destructive. In a social dilemma, which is defined as the situation in which a self-interested choice by everyone will create the worst outcome for everyone, this notion is also can sometimes be self-destructive because everyone makes the most self-rewarding choice and everyone suffers the greatest loss. The prisoner's dilemma is defined as the excessive tendency to seek concurrence among group members. On one particular category of social dilemmas that people face frequently and in vitally important contexts is called the resource dilemmas, which is defined as the concerns on how two or more people share a limited resources. Social dilemmas are but one type of conflict between individuals or groups that often must be resolved through negotiation. A successful negotiation is giving both sides the opportunity to reach an integrative agreement. It is a negotiated resolution to a conflict in which all parties obtain outcomes that are superior to what they would have obtained from an equal division of the contested resources. Many negotiations have the potential to result in integrative agreements in which outcomes exceed a 50-50 split, but negotiators often fail to achieve such outcomes. Communication, trust, and an understanding of the other party's perspective and cultural norms and values are key ingredients of successful negotiation. That concludes my presentation, and here are the two questions. Number one, with the diversity of culture in our country, do you find yourself primarily as an individualist with virtues of independence, autonomy, and self-reliance, or as a collectivist which promotes interdependence, cooperation, and social harmony? How do you say so? Second question, at some point in our life, we comply and conform to the social norms. How do you evaluate situations when there's a need to comply or conform to something versus what the Bible states in Romans 12:2? And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Thank you and have a blessed day.